Hello and welcome to On the Rocks, a BRTFC Supporters Club podcast where we discuss all things BRTFC, and I'm your host, Liam Goodley. This broadcast and our club are sponsored by Reynolds Furniture. Visit their store on 27 to 31 High Street, Bognor Regis today, or log on to their website, www.reynoldsfurniture.co.uk. For more details on our fantastic local service they can offer you. I'm joined today by a special guest. He is a dab hand with a pen and is the local scribe for all things sport. Here's our sports editor with a love for bringing the Rocks news to the masses. Welcome to the one and only Bognor Observer sports editor, Steve Bone. Thanks for joining me, Steve. How are you?
Thanks, Liam. Very well, thank you. Pleased to be on the show.
Unfortunately, I'm speaking to Steve after the 7-2 loss against Brighton and Hove Albion season of the Sussex Senior Cup quarter-final at home. Not the greatest of games to comment on afterwards, Steve, but what were your thoughts on the game?
Well, it was quite a sobering night for Bognor in a way, wasn't it? Up against a very good side. This was a strong Brighton under-23 side. I think we gave them too much time and space early on. They were 3 up within about sort of 20 minutes. I think after that, and particularly in the second half, I think Bognor did quite well. Actually showed a bit of fight and passion in the second half and got a couple of goals which lifted the crowd a bit. But men against boys at times, and the defence of the Senior Cup comes to an end, which is a shame.
It was a real shame. I mean, the midfield, I thought, particularly, was a lot stronger than ours at times in the first half. I think they overwrought us in midfield, and there were certain players. And even when we went down to 10 men, we did actually start playing some good stuff. It was unfortunate, that, wasn't it?
Yeah, at times in the first half we were overrun. They were very quick on the break, so even when Bognor had the ball, Brighton were never very far away from creating another chance. Clinical in the box as well, as you'd probably expect from players of that level at a professional club. But I think Bognor in the end could hold their heads high, and you can be sort of pleased with the way they ended the game, if not the way they started it.
Yeah, I agree with that, Steve. Obviously, Brighton will now take on Worthing in the next round of the semi-final round at Lancing's Culver Road ground later on this season. So, a bit of background behind you then, Steve. So how did it all start for you at Bognor Observer?
I joined the Bognor Observer in 2007, having previously done 17 years at the News, Portsmouth News. I was a news reporter, then I was a sub-editor, then I went into sport at the News. 5 years on the sports desk there, covering Pompey and Hampshire cricket and things like that, a bit of everything. And then a job came up at the Chichester Observer, the Chichester Observer series, which includes the Bognor Observer, as sports editor, and I made that move in the sort of early autumn of 2007.
Well, that's great, Steve. It's nice to know the sort of background, how you got there and that. I remember when you gave me a chance back in 2009, let me do some match reports at games, obviously at Bognor. I really appreciate that and enjoy covering Bognor as you do on a game-to-game basis. What's the secret behind obtaining a good story, especially at Nywood Lane, a place like Bognor? Is it just from the games, or is it behind the scenes you find you get more stories?
I think it's a bit of both, really. I think it's important to go to the games and watch the action and see how the team are playing and see how different individual players are playing. But the key really is communication with the managers and other people at the club. I speak on a weekly basis to Jack. I speak regularly to Robbie, just to find out their thoughts on performances that have gone before and games that are coming up and players that are playing and injuries that have occurred and that sort of thing. Also in touch with people like Simon Cook and just on the off-pitch things as well that are going on. Jack has been there. Jack has been a contact of mine at Bognor, obviously all the time I've been at the Bognor Observer, and he was the main port of call for many of my predecessors as well, and he's always very open and approachable. He's always got plenty to say, lots of opinions on what's happening at Bognor and in football on a wider basis. But with Bognor, and I think with a lot of clubs at this level, there's never a dull moment really. There's always something going on. You've either got a team in good form and going for promotion and cup runs and things like that. Obviously we had the Senior Cup last year, didn't we?
Yeah.
Or there's at times during the sort of 12-13 years I've been covering, it's been a relegation battle as well. So either way, it's a good story either way. Obviously we as the local paper prefer them to be doing well, and for a lot of those years they have been doing well. But no, it's been an enjoyable time covering Bognor. Like I say, never a dull moment, and always a story coming out of the club somewhere.
It's always one of two extremes, isn't it? It's either really good or it's a struggling season, and that obviously sells papers.
Yeah, it does seem to be that you rarely have a whole season in mid-table at
No.
Bognor.
It's
I think
one
there
or
are
the
some
other,
clubs
isn't it?
like that.
Yeah.
And I think probably on balance we've probably had more successful seasons than unsuccessful seasons in
Yeah,
that time.
definitely.
When I started at Bognor 2007 and the first couple of seasons there, it was relegation battles really from the old Conference South. Problems with finances, the old clubhouse burning down. That was quite a big story after I'd been at the Observer only about a year. But really, since then, it's been the rise back up, and it's not been without its problems. But some very good managers and coaches and players have come through the club, and generally, good times have been there. And the positive side of it happily does sell papers and get people looking at the website as much as the negative.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Steve. So would you agree that sometimes juicier stories happen off the pitch more than on it these days?
Can be the case, yeah. I think things have changed over the years in that it used to be the case that the media coverage of football was all about the match. That was everything. The match report was what people wanted to read in great detail in the paper. Now that's almost been overtaken because people can read a match report almost on the final whistle. People are more interested in the reaction to it and the other issues that are going on. When I cover a game, as has happened tonight, my match report will always be done straight away and it will be available on our website for people to read. In a way, what you're going to tell people that they don't know will come afterwards. So it'll come from the manager's post-match interview, or it might come from some controversy that's occurred in the game.
Yeah.
For example, tonight we've had a red card, and it might be the issue of how many games that player's going to miss.
Do you believe it's 3 games or 4 games? Some people were saying.
For Harvey tonight, I would hope 3. I think
Yeah.
sometimes when you get 2 red cards close to each other, you can get an extra game. I would imagine 3 games, and I think it probably will be 3 league games, unfortunately, which will be a big miss for us. But like I say, that's the sort of thing that that's not. Just that sort of shows we're not just covering the matches, we're covering all the issues that come out of it as well, and that's what people want to know about. And hopefully we provide a good service locally in telling people the ins and outs of the issues that arise from games and from the club.
Yeah, exactly, Steve. Agree with that. What was the first match you covered for Bognor? Can you remember it?
I can remember the first match I came to and the first match I covered, and unfortunately neither of them were very memorable. So it was the start of the 2007-8 season. First game I came to, which was just before I started in the job, was at home to Bath City, and I remember Paul Jones was playing in goal for Bognor.
Yes.
Played a couple of games when Craig Stoner, I think, was out injured.
The ex-Southampton goalkeeper.
Wales,
Yeah.
Liverpool keeper.
Yeah.
Was introduced to Jack Pearce for the first time. I'd spoken to him many times on the phone while I was at the news, but that was the first time I'd met him. And my colleague, who was covering sport a little bit before me on that night, asked Jack for an interview after the game, and all he said was, "We're in a relegation battle." And then he walked off, and I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting if this is the character that I'm going to be interviewing after games. But Jack's not often like that. He normally has plenty to say. And then a couple of weeks later, started in the job. First game I covered, in terms of covering the match report and doing it all myself, was at home to Fisher Athletic, an inglorious 1-0 defeat at home, I'm afraid. So it wasn't the best of starts, but that was at the start of a season when wins were few and far between. And it was quite tough sort of covering the club at that time.
Yeah, I remember it was in that difficult period when we were just going in transition, I think, that season. I can never write in shorthand, Steve. Are you able to do this?
Yes, when I was doing my journalism training just over 30 years ago now, shorthand was one of the key things I had to learn, along with things like law, newspaper law, public administration, and the basics of how to write a story. Shorthand, I got up to, at my peak, I think I got up to 110 words a minute.
Wow.
In those days, it was an essential thing for any journalist to have. These days, the recording devices like the one we're talking on now are much more widely used, and I believe that not even all journalism courses now treat shorthand as essential. I still think it's a very good skill to have, because you never know if your recording device is going to let you down.
Exactly.
And you're going to have to start noting down what somebody's saying
Exactly.
talking at normal speed. So my shorthand is probably not 110 words a minute now. It's probably a bit rustier than that, but over time you develop your own shorthand and your own shortcuts, so that hopefully you're getting things down accurately and can report them as such.
Do you believe that tablets and phones and things have taken over now that shorthand's kind of not really happening? It's more tablets, phones, recording devices.
That does seem to be the way of it, and that's fine because you can record a conversation. I've just done it with Robbie Blake after the game tonight. I've recorded it, and I'm able to put that whole conversation, that whole sort of interview, on the website straight away. That also means that when if I'm doing a written version of that, I've got the whole conversation to refer back to. Whereas in shorthand, in reality, you probably don't take down every single word. So I think technology has allowed the coverage to improve and newspapers to develop the way they record things and relay them to people.
Yeah, it's so much easier now in the digital world. When not covering the football and working hard to meet the press deadline, Steve, what do you like to do in your spare time?
I go and watch football.
Brilliant.
Busman's holiday.
Yeah.
No, I've got a family. I've got a wife and two grown-up children, so they take a fair bit of my time. But I am a sports fan as well as a sports journalist, so I do spend a fair bit of my time watching Pompey. People probably know I'm a Pompey fan. Like a bit of cricket, bit of racing as well. Like music. Don't go to as much live music as I would like to, but that's always in the back of my mind. And without wanting to sound like a martyr, there are in some weeks there isn't that much spare time anyway, because the job sometimes takes over a little bit.
Time. Even when you're at home.
6-8 weeks.
Yeah,
that's right. You never sort of off duty fully, but that's the profession I knew I was joining, and I'm quite happy with that, and quite happy to be occupied in that way. But sport is a big part of my life, working life and other life.
Yeah, it's good that crossover that you have with your job and that.
Yeah.
In your opinion, how has the media changed in the past 10 to 20 years? Has the online world taken over local press, particularly in your role as the sports area of journalism?
Yes, it's been difficult for newspapers ever since the internet first sort of came to the fore, really. I don't think newspapers have ever quite got to grips with the balance between what they do in newspapers and what they do online. Traditionally, the stuff they do online has been free for people, and that has over time affected the sales of newspapers. And when sales of newspapers go down, revenue goes down because there's less advertising coming in, so on and so forth. And today, I think the key thing is you don't often see younger people reading newspapers, and if you do, it might be a free one they've picked up with the London Standard in the capital or something. People are still buying local papers to an extent. It's the traditional, the loyal readership, the older people, and particularly with a weekly paper like the Observer, we will offer people things that they won't be able to find anywhere else, things that are happening in their local area that they wouldn't otherwise know about. But gradually there's been a shift towards internet and digital, and you can't stop it, really. That is how more and more people want to get their news, and they want to watch things on YouTube, and they'll discuss things on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And newspapers have suffered, and I don't think you'll ever reverse that. I think you can try to slow it down by looking at what your newspaper offers and trying to offer people something different, featurey things and columnists and things that they might not see online first. But it's difficult, and that's why a lot of papers and a lot of media have had to cut back staff numbers and so on. But we're still there and we soldier on. So
exactly. And talking of Twitter, Steve, you're a keen tweeter. How can people follow you on Twitter?
Are you sure they want to?
I'm sure they do.
I'm not sure it's a good idea sometimes. I am on Twitter, and I've got a fair few followers through Bogner, apart from anything else. If people do want to follow me, my Twitter handle is SteveBone1, so STEVEBONE1. You'll find a lot of Rocks updates on there, breaking news as well as sort of match reports and team news and that sort of thing. You'll find a lot of other local sport. Any sports story that I do or put on our website, I will always link on Twitter. And you'll also find sort of general chit chat about football, music, anything from sort of roadworks to referees, really. Come and have a little bit of debate with me if you want to. And we have some fun on Twitter. There's a lot of banter flying around, but I enjoy it, and hopefully one or two other people do too.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. Yeah, obviously you have a lot of followers on Twitter. I have to admit, I hardly use it myself. I've got an account, but I don't really use it. I'm on Facebook quite a lot. What do you think are the benefits of using Twitter in your role today?
I think Twitter is good for sport because it's a platform where you can provide quick updates and a lot of updates. So, for example, during this match tonight, I've probably tweeted, I don't know, a dozen times just with goal updates, and literally you can say latest score, Bognor 2, Brighton 7, as I had to say towards the end tonight. Tell people who scored the last goal, tell me how many minutes there are to go. And if people are just flicking in and out of the coverage and perhaps they're doing something else but wanting to know what the score is, then that's a good way for them to keep in touch. At the same time, you can then, when you post your match report at the end of a game or later on, post a link to it. So again, if people are more interested, they can go and have a look. And I've always thought that sport is better suited to Twitter than Facebook. I've never been a big Facebook fan myself. I've never really got on with it. I find it more of a sort of a social thing rather than a news and
between
sport
friends
thing.
More than
I think
for
so.
the wider audience.
Not everyone would agree with that, but I probably spend far too much time on Twitter. If anything, I should probably sort of learn to leave it alone at times, but it's quite addictive, and we have some fun on there, and hopefully I provide a bit of a service to people too.
Yeah, and you can engage with a lot of obviously celebrities on there and big names in the football world, which is great. You must have watched and reported on some top players in your career to date. In your opinion, who is the best player you have witnessed and reported on so far?
Good question, and I'll probably switch over to my Pompey coverage and Pompey days there. I think the best player I've seen play for sort of one of the teams I've been supporting or covering would be back in the 2001-2 season. Pompey were lucky enough to have the services of Robert Prosinecki.
Oh, I remember him.
Croatian midfielder, absolute genius with the ball. He was actually playing for Pompey at a time when the rest of the team wasn't very good, but he just carried that team. He did things with a ball that nobody else we'd seen before could do, and nobody since could do.
Really confident, I remember.
Yeah, absolute magician. He had the little step overs and drag backs, and he could leave an opponent or two on their backside just with a little flick of the foot, and it was great to watch. Pompey didn't have a great season when he was there, but he certainly lit it up. And then I was also lucky enough to cover Pompey for the Portsmouth News in their first couple of years in the Premier League. So Paul Merson played for Pompey for a season just before they got into the Premier League. So there was a bit of a crossover with me covering and him playing.
Yeah.
But then people like Teddy Sheringham, Patrick Berger,
unbelievable,
Steve Stone, some great pros and some very good international players, and some of them I was lucky enough to interview on occasions and actually get to know quite well as well. So I feel quite privileged looking back on that period of my career. I've been some good players. I know we'll move on to speak about Bognor in a minute, but those were good days, and you have to sort of pinch yourself sometimes to think about some of the great players you've seen and perhaps interviewed as well.
No, that's great. Great names there, Steve. Could you describe your most memorable moment so far following the Rocks from a Bognor Observer perspective?
That would have to be I've seen, lucky enough in those sort of 12 years, I've seen Bognor win 2 promotions through playoffs and lift the Sussex Senior Cup last year. But I think the one game that sticks in my mind is the 2012 playoff semi-final. So not the final, playoff semi-final against Godalming.
Oh, brilliant.
4-4 draw after extra time. 3-3 after 90 minutes, 4-4 after extra time. Bognor won 5-3 on penalties. I think it's the only game I've covered or seen where both sides have led twice and lost the lead twice. It was 1-0, 1-1, 1-2. Well, I won't go through all the goals of here all night, but
is it Ashley Paul Robinson playing for us at the time?
I think scored a hat trick.
That's right.
I think he got 3
penalties.
or 4.
I think.
A couple of penalties in there. And it was just it was a big game anyway, because Bognor had missed out on in the playoffs the previous year and really wanted to get up. And at times that night it looked as though they were going to stroll through, and then at other times it looked like they were going to blow it again. But it was just one of those crazy nights at the Lane. I'm sure you remember it as much as I do.
I remember,
sure.
yeah.
And we then went on to beat Dulwich Hamlet in the final, which was great, of course, and that secured promotion and everything. But it's the semi-final that has stuck in the mind probably more than any other Bognor game I've seen.
Yeah, very memorable game that, Steve. Did you ever play the game at all? And were there any particular players you looked up to as a youngster?
I played A little bit at school, but I never carried on playing after I left school. I was quite a sort of a solid, if unspectacular, right back in my day.
Oh, okay.
Got into the school team a couple of times, I think, but there was never a permanent fixture and never likely to be scouted by any sort of pro clubs or anything like that. Wish I'd carried on playing after I'd left school. Don't think I'd have got anywhere really in terms of making a sort of any sort of semi-professional career out of it or anything like that.
Just for fun, really. For
Yes,
play.
that's right. Yeah, and all I've done since is have sort of kickabouts with work colleagues and that sort of thing. In terms of players I looked up to, I mean, again, this is Pompey days, and this is when I was a teenager first watching Pompey. People like Mark Haitley, Alan Biley playing up front for Pompey. Then when I was a little bit older, Mick Quinn. It's always the strikers you remember, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a shame, a bit unfair on the defenders and everybody else, but some great players at Pompey in the 80s. Alan Ball was the manager then, and he brought some really sort of good and passionate players through.
Was Darren Anderton played as well, didn't he?
Yes, Darren Anderton, a little bit after those, but broke into the Pompey
later.
team at the start of the 90s. Almost got us to the FA Cup final in 1992 against Liverpool, scored the famous goal at Highbury, which I was there to see. So again, lucky to have seen many good players.
Oh, that's really great. What would you consider as your biggest achievement as a sports journalist so far in your career?
I think that would probably have to be some of the Pompey coverage that I did with the news, because it was a big time for Pompey. They just got into the Premier League. They were having various battles to stay in the Premier League. There was all sorts of politics with Harry Redknapp leaving Pompey and coming back and trying to win the fans over, that sort of thing. I'd actually left the news by 2008 when they got to the FA Cup final, which is a bit of a regret, because I'd like to have, although I was at the Cup final as a fan, and I was back there again 2 years later when we lost the FA Cup final. That would have been great to actually be the person covering that for the local paper. But so those days I look back on fondly. But at the same time, the work I've done with Bognor is no less important. They are the big team locally here in this part of West Sussex, and hopefully I've sort of covered them well and comprehensively. Whether it's a sort of miserable home defeat or winning the Sussex Senior Cup, or any of the sort of stories that have come out in between games. You have the standout games, but it's in many ways it's what you do in between the more memorable ones that counts.
And the quieter moments, I suppose it's difficult to create stories when when there's nothing happening.
Yeah, sometimes you've got to be a little bit inventive, and you've got to probe a little bit further if you're speaking to Jack or whoever, and just find a line and find something that people are going to be interested in.
Yeah. So you've seen some great goals over the years at Nywood Lane and away from it. What would you consider as your favourite Bognor goal so far?
Yeah, I've seen many goals, and I've seen a fair few by the likes of Luke Nightingale and Jason Pryor. Many great goals. The one that really stands out is, and a lot of fans will remember this one because it's not that long ago, about 2 or 3 seasons ago, Jimmy Mewett against Leyton Orient in the FA Trophy. You will not see a ball more cleanly struck than that one.
No, it was
arrowed
fantastic,
it into the top corner, brought the ground to life. I think it was an equaliser. I think
that's right.
I think we were 1 down.
Extra time, didn't it? In the
might have done. I think we ended up losing 2-1.
That's right.
But absolutely great goal, and I think you can still see it on YouTube if you look up Bognor v Leyton Orient or something.
Got a lot of hits, didn't it? I think on YouTube.
Absolutely, and I think it won goal of the season as well, didn't it? But no, there's been a few screamers down here over the years, but that one sticks in the memory.
It certainly does with me as well, Steve. I know you enjoy lots of other sports, and particularly you report on other sports. Could you sort of go into more detail about what other sports you really cover?
Yeah, I mean, at the Observer, we cover everything, every sport that's going. Our pages are open to anyone and anything that happens, whatever the sport. My own sort of favourite sports in terms of other ones I watch and like to get involved in would be cricket in the summer. I've always found cricket a nice sort of antidote to the football season, really. You can put the football season behind you. It's always been long and arduous, and it's nice to have a break from it and get out and watch a bit of cricket, which is a totally different sport at a different pace. And I quite like my horse racing as well.
Yes.
Didn't particularly before I came to the Observer, but because we've got Goodwood and Fontwell on our doorstep, you've got great racing all year round, on the flat in the summer at Goodwood, over the jumps in the winter at Fontwell. And I've really sort of got into that, and you start to follow different horses and trainers and jockeys, and I like a day at the races, particularly up on the downs up at Goodwood in the middle of summer if you've got a nice day for it. So I suppose those would be my two personal sort of favourites after football. But at the Observer, if you leaf through the sport page of the Observer, you'll find rugby, hockey, golf, bowls, tennis. Some of them, I'll admit, I don't know much about, and I don't understand the jargon. I struggle with rugby reports, I'll be honest with you, because it's such a different game to football, and it's a different set of rules and a different set of phraseology that people use in the reports. But at the same time, as a sports editor, it's my duty to make sure that those sports will get in there as well, and hopefully they do. So bit of everything really. The more sport we can have in the Observer, the more different sports, the better I think it is.
What's the most difficult sport to report on compared to football?
I mean, racing is actually quite difficult because there is so much to know and to learn, and at my level, I'm not a full-time racing journalist, obviously, and unless you are, you won't get to know everything there is to know. Things like the form of race horses and all the intricacies that go into it, and the handicapping system. It's a minefield, and it's almost a different language. So in a way, my coverage of racing locally is quite sort of superficial in that it doesn't need to go into that much detail. But each sport has got its own intricacies and its own its own set of rules, and to fans or players of that sport, that is the most important sport there is in the paper, so we've got to try to reflect that. I'm lucky in that I've got an army of correspondents, people like yourself, who send reports in from different sports and different clubs and teams, and that, the vast majority of what you read in the Observer is contributed material like that. And we couldn't put the paper together without those people, so indebted to them, and that will always be the case. So.
No, that's great, Steve. Who was your favourite player, manager, or coach that you've interviewed so far at Bognor?
Well, that's difficult because I don't want to upset anyone.
No.
I mean, I've been lucky with on the manager side of things. At different times, the person that I've spoken to weekly or more than once a week has been Jack Pearce, who keeps coming and going as manager, as we know. Michael Birmingham was the manager for a little while, quite early in my reporting days. Dabber was caretaker manager, and then coach. Dabber and Jamie for a while. I got on very well with Jamie Howell. I used to speak to him at exactly the same time every Wednesday morning, and we used to talk for about 45 minutes about all sorts of things, some of which could go in the paper and some of which couldn't.
To keep out.
And then more recently, Robbie has been the man doing the post-match interviews, which I enjoy. So I wouldn't really want to pick out one over the other. I suppose the constant is Jack, and I'm lucky in that Jack might not always agree with angles that we take in the paper. He might sometimes think we're being a bit negative when we don't need to be, but he always has something to say, and he'll always say it, and he's not afraid to say it, which I like. He'll always
want some honesty sometimes.
That's right, and you certainly get that with Jack. It can rub some fans up the wrong way sometimes, and I understand that. I understand why people get frustrated with him, but at the same time I can see his point of view from the as the man who's running the club and has got all the different pressures on him that he has. I think he does an excellent job, and I think when he does finally call it a day or step back or go upstairs, as they say, I think it will be very difficult shoes to fill. But no, I've been lucky in that I've had a good relationship with all those people over the years, and they've all brought different qualities to the job.
Yeah, certainly have. And so what would you say you love most about the football club at Bognor Regis Town?
I think it's just the friendly nature of it and all the people you meet there. You can walk into the ground on a match day and there'll be people that you don't particularly know. You might know them by sight, but you don't know them by name. They'll always say cheery hello. However the team are doing, I think people and the volunteers who run the club stay quite positive about things and try to look on the bright side and find the good in things. Had a friendly welcome the first time I went, apart from Jack doing a one-line post-match interview, and I think that's probably what draws a lot of people to Bognor. I think the number of players who come here for however long, and when they leave, they kind of keep in touch with Bognor. They keep an eye on Bognor's results, and quite often they'll come back for a second playing spell. I think that tells its own story. I don't think you'd get that if you didn't have such a sort of strong community spirit at Bognor, and that will serve it well for many years to come.
I'm sure it will, Steve. I totally agree with you. I know you follow Portsmouth and write a column for their match day programme as well as ours.
Yeah.
What's the story behind you supporting the Blues? Does it run in the family?
Yes, very much so. I think that's often the way with the club you support, isn't it? My dad, who's no longer with us, was a Pompey fan from when he was a boy. He used to take my older sister to games at a time when I wasn't really interested in football. I was when I was at junior school, I didn't have a great interest in football, didn't like playing it, didn't want to watch it.
I was similar when I was
Yeah.
young. Yeah.
Eventually, they dragged me along, and the first time I went to Fratton Park, it was to see a friendly against Arsenal in August 1981. There we go, I'm showing my age again now. And like many people, from the first time I went, I was quite hooked, and then kept going back, and still going back today. Don't get to every game down there by any means, but and so it certainly runs in the family, and I think that's often the way. And just to sort of prove that point, my son, who's now 17, is probably keener than me now on getting to Pompey games and everything. So, and hopefully that will continue down through the generations.
Yeah, whenever I've been to Pompey, the atmosphere is electric there at Fratton Park. I mean, it's always been great there. Special place to play football, isn't it?
Very much so. Yeah.
I think your coverage is great in the Bognor Observer, Steve. Would you
say so?
Yeah. Would you say that what would you say was your biggest story to date in the Bognor Observer from a Bognor football point of view?
That's interesting, because although the promotions are big, we always go big on that. The FA Trophy run was another one that
Massive,
made sort of front page news as well as back page news of some of the pictures and the celebrations that we had. But probably one of the biggest was actually after I'd been at the Observer for 2 weeks, when I phoned up Jack after a game. It was away to Newport County, drew 2-2. Bear in mind, he'd been manager, apart from a little spell where I think the Pullins were managers. Yeah. Jack had effectively been manager for 31 years, till I turned up. Phoned him up after this game at Newport. He told me who scored and what he thought of the game. And then, as a bit of a throwaway comment at the end, he said, "Oh, by the way, I told the team afterwards I'm resigning as first team manager." And my jaw dropped, and I thought, Jack Pearce standing down as manager, that can't be right. And this was the first time that this was back in 2007 when he stepped back. His health wasn't great, and he needed to sort of just take a step back from it, and he needed to fight fires, not literally, but he needed to run the club and get the club on an even keel off the pitch.
Okay, it's now time for the quick-fire Rocks players round. Just give me your favourite, Steve. Your preferred choices at the ready. Here we go. Nicky White or Ben Watson?
Didn't see either of them play for Bognor, but I'll go for Ben Watson because I know what a legend he was.
Julian Curnow or Ben Andrews?
Ben Andrews, because he was a great no-nonsense, solid defender who I saw in his year, or maybe even 2 years at Bognor.
David Piper or John Marzetti?
As a frustrated right back myself, I'd go for John Marzetti. I think he helped us get promotion in 2012. Actually, part of that team, wasn't he? So yeah, good solid performer.
David Wright or Richard G. Lowe?
Well, David Wright would get a point for his Pompey connections, but Richard G. Lowe would get a point because he was the one I actually saw play for Bognor, and I liked him. Good midfielder, liked to get in the box. So an honourable draw for those.
John Price or Stuart Axton?
I know John from his time at Pagham, but again, didn't see him play for Bognor. Did see Stuart Axton play for Bognor, and he got the winner in that 2012 playoff final, I think. I hope I've remembered that right. He was certainly in the team, so I'll give it to Stu, Big Stu.
Ashley Paul Robinson or Neil Scammell?
Used to love the way that Ashley Robinson took penalties. Used to walk up to them and just stroke them into the corner of the net, didn't he? Scored a lot of goals in quite a short space of time for Bognor, so I've got to give that one to Ashley.
Okay. Dallas White or Harvey White?
Again, never saw Dallas play for Bognor because he predates my time here, but have got to know Dallas in more recent times through chats in the boardroom. But Harvey's a bit of a Bognor legend, a modern day legend, isn't he?
Yeah.
Great servant to the club, so he gets my vote there. And you only have to speak to Robbie Blake about Harvey to know what high regard he's held in at the club.
Certainly agree. Stuart Tuck or Joe Cook?
Probably go for Joe Cook on that one. No disrespect to Stuart. Joe, not been at Bognor long, but really made his mark. Probably Bognor's most important defender this season, and I think, no disrespect to Bognor, but I think Joe will play at a higher level.
He certainly will, I agree. In your opinion, can Bognor make the playoffs?
I think they can. I think there's probably 6 or 7 teams that are going for the sort of 4th and 5th spot, or 3rd, 4th and 5th. I think probably Worthing and Folkestone will end up as the top 2. I think you need a bit of luck with injuries and a bit of luck in some games. But if Bognor can just hang on in sort of 7th or 8th, I think they're 9th at the moment as we speak. But if they can just hang on in there and be sort of 3 or 4 points off the top 5 going into the last 2 or 3 games, get a bit of momentum at the right time, I think every chance. And then once you finish 5th, and you're playing the team who's finished 2nd, I think you've got a good chance, because really all the pressure is on the team who's finished 2nd. So
totally agree.
We certainly wouldn't rule it out.
What are your personal views on the current squad? Are we a team that will grow in strength in time, or is it a team that can really go for it at the moment? It's difficult to say at the moment, but is it a team that is one for the future?
They've been so badly hit by injuries, not just this season, but over the last couple of seasons. It is difficult to judge them. Great potential there, but I do think once you lose 2 or 3 people to injuries, as we have at the moment with Doug Tuck, Jake Flanagan, himself relatively new, and Joe Cook, I think you can see the weaknesses then start to come in. Obviously, we've brought in 2 or 3 new players in the past week who from what we've seen tonight, look quite good. It's still quite, in terms of average age, it is still quite a young squad. So I think, I think if you can keep the nucleus of it together, I think in a season or 2, it could be very strong, and it might be the sort of squad that if you did get back up to National League South, you'd have a better chance of surviving at that level.
That's great, Steve. Final question. I believe in a good, strong and tackling midfielder to improve our chances of moving up the leagues. Pompey have certainly been our go-to team higher up the pyramid for a decent talent in recent years. If money was no object, and you were to choose any player from the current Pompey squad to join Bognor tomorrow, who would you choose and why?
Well, if you wanted your tough tackling midfielder who you think would make a difference, then you'd have to go for the captain, Pompey captain Tom Naylor, who is a key man for Pompey and has been a solid performer. You don't always notice him much, but he runs the show from the middle of the park really for Pompey. But I would go for a more attacking player. And at the moment, you'd have to go for Ronan Curtis.
Yeah.
He's had a Irish attacker, generally plays wide on the left and cuts in and likes to have a shot at goal. Scored and assisted something like 15 goals in total, between the two in the past 15 games, I think, something like that. I'm talking off the top of my head there. I'd like to see him at Bognor. Don't think we ever will, because money is an object, but
of course,
if I could choose anyone, it would probably be him at the moment.
Yeah, no. So, Steve, many thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to working with you for seasons to come. I really appreciate you spending the time to tell fans about your involvement with the club from a Bognor Observer perspective today. Thank you for your continued efforts getting news out about our team so quickly and efficiently, and letting our fans know the thoughts of our management team after every game, and indeed even in off-season, which I know particularly is appreciated by the fans across the area. Steve Bone is our source to all things BRTFC behind the scenes. I'd like to thank you personally for all the opportunities you've given me to report on Bognor games as well. This year I celebrate 10 years, I think, reporting on games, and that's all down to you, Steve Bone, and the Bognor Observer, so big thank you for that.
Thank you, and can I just say thank you to you, because this is all on a voluntary basis. You've covered goodness knows how many matches for us over those 10 years that we might soon be into the 11th year, and I hope fans and readers of the Observer appreciate your efforts as well. You travel the length and breadth of the sort of south and southeast some weeks, all for nothing some weeks as well, and it is likewise it is very much appreciated by me and I'm sure all the Observer readers.
I really appreciate your time here today, Steve, and again a big thanks to Bognor Observer Steve Bone for being my guest today, and getting the chance to chat with him was great fun for me, and I appreciate him taking the time. Grab your copy of the Bognor Observer every Thursday in local stores to find out the latest from Nywood Lane. If you would like to get your say in an upcoming episode of On the Rocks, then please contact me on Twitter at Liam Goodley, or see me on game days. If your business would like to sponsor our podcast, then please contact David Robinson to talk you through the options. Get your company mentioned on the air with us every episode. This has been an On the Rocks podcast production brought to you by the BRTFC Supporters Club. Thank you for listening, and I will see you at the next game. Up the Rocks!